Well, and look, we're going to get started because we have 60 people in. So thank you to everyone for joining. Welcome to another episode of Draw Me Anything. My name is Jason Chatfield. I'm a cartoonist for The New Yorker and a comedian in New York City. And my guest today is the wonderful Jeremy Kaplan of Wonder Tools, among many other things. I mentioned Wonder Tools because it's a Substack that I have subscribed to from very early on. I mean, as soon as I saw that you were on Substack, I jumped straight on board. It's a great newsletter. And we met in person in New York City at a Substack meetup recently. And trying to put faces to names and seeing people in real life is really fun because I actually get to kind of tell you, hey, I read your stuff. So welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for making time.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and it was fun to meet in person. I feel like, a lot of us in the Substack world, or anyone who's creating independently, we're sitting in our own space or standing in our own space, spending time in our silo and looking at our screen or at maybe a couple of people around us. But it's rare that we get a chance to actually talk face to face with other creators, especially people outside of our sphere. Like what you do is so different from what I do in many ways, even though we're both on Substack. And so I just treasure the opportunity to kind of expand my horizons periodically and see people do things I can never do. Delighted to be here.
Of course. No, and that's a lot of the reason that I wanted to have you on is that, usually I have artists and writers and people who do similar things to me. And I've always found it fascinating, your background, your approach to things. You don't do the same things as me. And I think I'm, selfishly just want to learn from you. Every time I get one of your newsletters, I don't know about you, but I had to do like an audit of all the Substacks that I subscribe to. I was way too many. And yours, it's one of the few Substacks that I actually click on the title every time so that it opens in the browser because I want to see it in full and I want to see all the links and all the images and everything so it doesn't cut off in Gmail. And what's interesting to me is that you seem to have an ability, this is something I find very difficult, an ability to distill things down into a very understandable, digestible, comprehensible sort of language. It's not too esoteric. It's not technical. It's very accessible. And that's a very underrated skill, I think. I think it's very difficult to make some of these complex tools that you write about understandable and relevant to people who don't quite understand what they are. Is that a part of your background that you've developed that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. That's like a what I call a rich compliment, which is just like a specific compliment, which I really, really appreciate. It means a lot to me. Yes, it's something I work really hard at, actually. A lot of these kinds of newsletters that we write, for a reader, it takes 3 minutes or 5 minutes, right? Even if you open another window, as you described, like it's something you can read pretty quickly because there's not that many words, maybe 1,000 words.
Sure.
And for those 5 minutes, it might take 500 minutes to create, or even more in some cases. I think of it as like a 100-to-1 ratio often, the amount of time we spend. And I'm guessing it's similar for someone like you too. So, and a couple of things I think have helped me with that process of working at that. I think it's always like a journey. It's always a work in progress. But one thing that helped me was working for Time for Kids. So as a journalist, one of the jobs I had was at Time Inc. There was no openings that I could see at Time Magazine right away, but there was a job opening at Time for Kids. And this was a while back in my career before I was at CUNY. I'm now at the City University of New York. That's where I'm standing here at the Graduate School of Journalism, where I teach. But before that, I was at Time Magazine. But before I was at Time Magazine, I was at Time for Kids. And at Time for Kids, we were writing for children, and we were writing about complicated stories. So it wasn't sort of bears and doves and sort of sweet little kid stories. It was actually like news, but written in a way that kids could understand. Kids from 8 to 13 or 15, depending on the edition we were working on. And that was really good practice, really good training, because you had to really understand the subject to explain it. You had to write it concisely. You had not 1,000 words, you had like 100 words or some small number of words to convey something. So that was really good practice because week after week, you'd have to explain really complicated stuff happening in the world multiple times over and over and refine it, revise it. And that was helpful. Yeah. I think also like the teaching kind of skill that I've worked at for a long time as a teacher, professor, is also related. Like when you're teaching, you're also thinking about how can I explain this more simply? How can I make this more clear? How can I
Yeah.
get rid of the unnecessary details? How can I try to share this from the perspective of someone who's reading it, what they would be wondering about, what questions would they have, and how can I kind of anticipate and preempt some of those questions?
Yeah.
Um, Also, one other thing I would say is a lot of these things are new to me. So
Hmm.
I look at Walt Mossberg as a kind of mentor for me. He was
Yeah.
someone who, for those who don't know, Walt Mossberg wrote a column for a long time for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
And he famously said that he wanted the job because all the prior tech writers many of the prior tech writers he knew were kind of tech geeks or experts in details of technology, and he was kind of an ordinary guy, and he was just figuring out, what is this internet thing? What are these Apple computers like? And he was writing from the perspective of everyone else, like he was an ordinary guy trying to figure it out, figure out what we
Hmm.
people. And I feel like that too. Like a lot of these tools I come to knowing nothing about them, and therefore, I think can kind of be relatable to people who also aren't tech professionals and just are trying to figure out, is this useful for me? And how should I use this? And what are 3 ways of using this that would be actually practical?
Hmm.
As opposed to a lot of what's out there, which is announcements about what's new and very technical and very detailed and assume a lot of knowledge. And that's not really my jam.
Right. No, and I think you write for your reader, but your reader is you. And as you say, like you are coming to these tools cold sometimes and just sort of figuring out like, what would people want to know about this? What do I want to know about this? It's funny you mentioned I was Mossberg, Kara Swisher, I think, was talking about one of his contemporaries. It's like about tech writing and about making it accessible and not too nerdy and disappearing into these wormholes of language that just completely alienate the reader. Or assume some level of advanced knowledge. Your Substack, for anyone who doesn't subscribe to it, by the way, just there's a button up in the top left here. If you click subscribe, Jeremy Kaplan has a wonderful Substack called Wonder Tools. The thing I find interesting about your approach is it's not just new tools, it's new features to existing tools.
Mm,
So,
mm, mm,
so I mean, I do want you to describe to the viewers sort of what your newsletter is, essentially because when I first came to it, I, like many of your readers, I was just so overwhelmed with like all of the different tools, the different models, the different software, and all of these things that were just like it was like drinking from a fire hose. I would just when I thought I had my sort of workflow down pat, there'd be this whole new tool that just came in to blow everything else out of the water. And since, say, like October, November 2022, it's just been nothing but a freight train of new material and this explosion of AI. And I talk about and write about AI a lot in my Substack and its effects on the economy, on society, on the arts, which is my area of experience. And what's fascinating to me is you seem to cover a lot of angles on this. You're not just staying in the lane of here's a tool, here's how it works. You kind of show how you're using it and how it's relevant, how it fits into the whole ecosystem. So I'd love you to explain, first of all, just what your newsletter is, but then sort of go into that detail about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that question. I see this not just as a list of tools or links, right? There's a lot of places you can find 50 new AI things that have been launched in the past couple of weeks, and it just sort of adds to the pile. I
Mm,
think what we need is more curation and more guidance
mm.
and some independent analysis. And also what you mentioned about not just pointing to the tools, but to the features within the tools and the
Yeah.
workflows and the use cases is the way I think about it, which is like, when would I use this particular feature and for what purpose? So
Yes.
Gemini, right, has
Yeah.
so many different things. I just wrote about Gemini as an example.
That was a great post, by the
And
way.
and my goal in those and Notebook LM is another example of this where,
Mm,
okay, so you know about Notebook LM, but how do you actually use it in a way that's useful for your day-to-day work? Like we're all sitting in
mm,
front, most of us, many of us are sitting in front of a computer a lot of hours a day, right? And we're punching out email, we're taking notes, we're on Zooms, we're doing various things we do for work. And knowing that there's a tool out there that does 10,000 things and that someone's, using for their particular work doesn't necessarily help you. So my aim is to help people who are reading this to find a few specific ways they can use a tool, whether it's Gemini or Notebook LM or a methodology. So sometimes I write about, like I wrote a piece recently about timeboxing because
Mm,
I'd heard that term thrown around a lot. I know people kind of um, reference it, but I felt like, okay, do people actually know how to do this, or what tools to use for it, or how it works, or why it would be useful? And I wrote another piece about finding great books because I was in a mode where I was like, I don't want to watch the news. I don't want to
mm.
read the daily news and the screaming back and forth. I want to read some deep books to learn, to educate myself on things
Yeah.
that
That's
don't.
one of my favorite posts of yours.
And so those are actually not necessarily specifically about a tool per se. There's a bunch of
Mm,
different tools that I use to find really cool books or to highlight stuff in books that I'm reading. And I think that reflects my interest in how we integrate these tools in our actual lives.
mm,
Because as you mentioned, there's so many tools coming at us, right? Any given day, you can go on Product Hunt or other sites and you'll see 10 or 50 different tools, depending on which list you're looking at, that are coming
mm.
out that day. And then, as you mentioned, it's not just the tools, it's each tool has new features, right? ChatGPT is launching new features. Gemini is launching new features. Notebook LM is launching new features. Claude just yesterday announced this thing called Dispatch, where you can now text your Claude code setup from your phone. Like there's just
Wow.
things blasting at us every day. And so my goal is once a week to offer people a curated guide to one specific kind of thing that they can use with reference to how I use it in my own life. So it's real examples and templates. Or, for example, when I wrote about deep research, I shared
Mm.
like a bunch of the deep research
I
reports
saw
that I
those in
generated.
Google Docs. Yeah.
And the reason is that, you might see deep research and you're like, okay, but what does that research look like? Is it actually
Mm,
useful? Is it very technical? Is it, and then if you want to try it yourself, that's going to take you 20 minutes. You may not have an account that has that feature enabled. And so
mm.
then you'd have to buy it to figure it out if it's useful. So my goal is just to kind of give people a little sense of that and a few different examples. They can look at the examples and say, oh, that is relevant for me. Or no, I don't really need that. Or oh, I didn't realize it had that capability, or I didn't realize it was 40 pages and it had the links and references. That makes it more credible to me. So basically, people can get beyond just saying like, oh, there's this deep research thing, to saying, oh, I see how it works. I see a few different use cases. Oh, and here's a few tips for when you do it. Make sure the query is this kind of query and has some length and specificity to it. I didn't
Mm.
realize that. I thought I should just type in like a Google query. And so hopefully people come away with something that is relatable and actionable, like useful for them.
Yeah.
And it also, for me, is about a little bit of being evergreen.
Sure.
Like, a lot of things are about what happened today. Like this tool came out, that tool made some announcement, this person was fired, whatever. And that kind of is disposable, in the sense that you can turn it on tomorrow and you're going to see another group of people who are fired, or another, new tool that was launched. And what I want to do, what my aim is to create things that people can return to, partly because people don't have time to read it every time anyway. I know
No,
that
sure.
one of the
Mm.
most common comments I hear is like, people are like, well, I save it for later. Which might mean that it's too long. It probably does mean it's too long or it's too frequent. But it also means that hopefully that it's evergreen, in the sense that like Gemini is still going to be Gemini like 2 weeks from now. They might offer some new features. I'm sure they'll have updates next month, for example. But like the core kind of elements of Gemini, the interface where you can choose a
Mm.
tool and you can choose, um, whether you're going to voice dictate or whatever, like those basic structures typically stay, at least for a while. So anyway, that's another part of what I'm doing, is trying to create some resources that people can use on their own time when they're ready to and when they want to, as opposed to kind of disposable news that's going to disappear tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting insight, the evergreen nature of your posts, the fact that they do archive well and they do sort of hold, if someone does save it and read it 3 weeks from now, yeah, it's still going to be relevant to them. Is that may be I don't know if that's your journalistic background sort of tapping into the idea of something having more of a life to it, so that it's not only part of, capturing the zeitgeist at the moment, but also being relevant in a longer, larger picture. I have been in my sort of experimentation and writing about everything digital and tools and AI. Every now and then I get confused. about how to articulate it because I can be accused of being a doomer or a Luddite. And I'm quite the opposite. I've always been an early adopter. I was one of the first cartoonists to start using Wacom tablets and digital drawing tools. And I
Yeah,
was always
you taught me about that when we met. I was interested to learn about that. Yeah.
right. So I've never shied away from folding digital tools into my workflow. I have an iPad with Procreate. I have, a big Cintiq. I use Sense Labs tablets. I get sent tablets to test out and review and by different companies. And I'm very honest. I'm usually very honest if they're not good. And if they're good. But the reason I am always kind of keeping my antenna up for new technology and tools is that I'm not a Luddite. I do think that there is a lot of utility and use and value in finding tools that help you either automate the things that are drudgery, that can free up your time and your mind to do the things you actually want to do, to invest your time and energy into the things you do want to focus on. And I think, yes, there are drawbacks. There are always drawbacks, and you have to kind of find your own sort of ethical boundaries. I wrote recently about the tools that I use, the AI tools that I use, because I felt like, as much as I talk about AI and how it's affecting everything from the economy and society and the arts and everything, I still use some tools and I'm very deliberate about it. I use Grammarly AI. I have for a long time. I've used different kinds of tools for editing, for proofreading. Deep research with Gemini is really fascinating. I'm finding that really interesting and pro. Um, but I have, obvious misgivings about the technologies, about the environmental factors, about the ethical factors. I don't trust some of these founders and CEOs at some of these companies. So I just, in the same way that I opt not to shop at certain stores, I opt not to use those tools if I disagree with the ethics of the people building the tools. For instance, I don't use Meta AI. I know what it could do. I've seen it. I don't use Grok. Same reason.
Yeah.
I use Gemini largely because I've been using all the Google products, the G Suite, for as long as I can remember. But I I do feel like they're winning the race in a way, but they're doing it in such a way that doesn't completely compromise their integrity. They have more data than anybody. The models are super impressive. The last release was just extraordinary. I do still have misgivings about the environmental factors of these tools and the data centers and what they're doing, but I think there is a sweet spot there, and I think there is, as you say, the utility is different for different people. And for instance, and I'm going to throw to you in a second about this because I do want to get your take on this. But I wrote a post about 10, 12 years ago about timeboxing, of all things. My people ask me how I do all the things that I do, and it's because I work from a calendar and not a to-do list. It's okay to make a to-do list, but then you've got to plug it into the calendar. And then when I time box, I kind of predict how long something might take, that chunk of time. And then what I do is, if it took longer, I adjust it in the calendar. If it took shorter, I adjust it as well. And then the next time I do a similar task, I will copy and paste that chunk and put it in my iCal. And that tool, that one post, I put it on Medium back in the day and made like $2,000 on the media partner program just from that one thing going viral. And I was like, I didn't know this was an interesting new thing. I thought Cal Newport talked about this in Deep Work ages ago. But it just feels like sometimes there are tools that can really help people that they just, or workflows or processes that don't necessarily occur to people. What's been the most valuable thing for you, the most valuable tool that you've found personally? Because you're, as you say, you're teaching in journalism. You're working on your Substack. You have these skills. You have this. You're a busy person, and you have all these different things that you need to get done in a day. What are the most useful tools that you're using, and to what degree do you do the sort of mental arithmetic on sort of the ethics of the people creating the technology and all that kind of stuff? Because I know it's just this ever moving target. This constant. It's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, I think there's separate buckets of concern or buckets of focus.
Sure.
Like, when we are in a restaurant, we're sometimes eating for pleasure. We're sometimes eating for, to satisfy ourselves. We sometimes have ethical concerns about the way food is grown or animals are raised, but we're not necessarily thinking about all those things at the same time every day. We sometimes are just at a meal to have enjoyment, or we're at a meal because we have to be fed. And we are I think, um, all of the different things we do in our lives, like we fly on airplanes, we, stream on Netflix,
Right.
we use, social streaming platforms, TikTok, et cetera. Like all of those have environmental costs. All of them have
Yeah.
environmental impact. The food we eat, the cities we live in, like the transportation we use, all that stuff matters. And so I do think those are important considerations, especially in our contemporary world, like given the
Mm.
climate crisis. So I'm not dismissive or in denial about those issues in any way, especially with someone with children, like who are going
Mm.
to inherit this, society in this world.
Right.
However, I don't find it constructive to kind of make each and every kind of productivity related decision or kind of functional decision on a day to day basis based on those kind of macro
Sure.
questions. That's my personal approach, is to separate them out. I think there are people, for example, who are doing really good reporting and analysis and research on environmental issues, environmental considerations, alternatives to, common LLMs, et cetera.
Mm.
And there are different views and there's different perspectives on this as well. Andy Masley is someone, for example, who's kind of taken a counter view a little bit to some of the thinking on the data usage and data centers and water usage. And,
Mm.
in many areas, there's like seems to be a broad consensus around like this is like, a particularly problematic situation. But there's some counter views that say, um, look at this a little differently. I don't want to get too deep into that because it's a whole other subject.
Sure. Yeah.
But my point is that I do think those are important issues. I personally don't feel like that's my area of expertise.
Mhm.
And I think there's a place for different kinds of journalism. And what I do, I consider to be kind of service journalism. And other people are going to do the investigative journalism. Karen Howe's book, Empire of AI. There are many others.
Mm.
We're actually launching this new book group for the Wonder Tools community,
Oh, great.
focused on 10 AI books, 10 AI related books in 2026, one a month.
Right.
And first one we're starting with actually next week is AI Snake Oil, by a couple of Princeton profs. And that's a book which is really interesting. And it's a critique to some extent of some aspects of AI, particularly predictive AI,
Yes.
when, people, either hospitals or prisons or other institutions, employers use AI to kind of predict how someone's going to perform or to evaluate someone based on a video interview.
Mm.
And those have a lot of problematic aspects as well that aren't necessarily just the environmental aspects or data center aspects. They're kind of the flaws in the system themselves and how they function.
Hmm.
So anyway, there's a lot of issues, but my focus is primarily on the service journalism. And I periodically like to step back and sort of, read what I can and learn what I can about some of the broader macro issues,
Mm.
just to try to be as educated as I can. But I think that sometimes we need to take a little bit of a longer view as opposed to some report that was in the news about yesterday about what so-and-so said or did.
Right.
I just find that to be overwhelming, and it's hard to really develop a deep understanding, for me at least, that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think your background in journalism and your background, just in general, I feel like you do contextualize a lot of these things as far as like these, the tools and what how they're made. You do have there was a post that you did. I was talking to a friend of mine, Alex Hallett, who's a cartoonist in the UK. We did one of these DMAs, and she was watching another one that I had done with Liza Donnelly from the New Yorker, and
Oh, yeah.
Liza said that she had used AI as a brainstorming partner. So just sort of to throw ideas around, punch up gags, kind of come up with like concepts or premises, or just kind of brainstorm in general. And so then Alex wrote a post today. She does a great Substack called Cartooning in the Age of AI, which I think you would really enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
Any of your subscribers, in fact, anyone watching, Alex Hallett's Cartooning in the Age of AI, really good Substack. She heard us talking and said, I didn't think to use it that way. So then she started brainstorming and sort of going back and forth with an LLM about some premises for her cartoons. She put some notes. She took some photos of some notes that she made while she was on a walk, and then kind of, started. The foundation was those notes, and then started building on that. And what I found really interesting when I was reading it was that there was a point where it was really helpful and it was of great utility, until a certain point where it said, "Hey, do you want me to draw this for you?"
Uh-huh.
And so two things happened. I think the panic set in where she was like, oh no, my job is in peril. But also she was like, I need to know where the beginning and the end, where my line is. I think everyone has a different line
Yeah.
of where they're comfortable using these tools. And I find that really fascinating how and where people draw those lines. And as you say, there are great people doing really in-depth reporting about everything from environmental factors to social and economic factors, and sort of the ethical bounds of using tools like this. And then you see every 5 minutes, as you say, there's a new story about Dario Amodei saying all white collar jobs are going to disappear within 3 years, and then kids graduating who learned to code who are now just like floating, going, well, if there's, what do I do now? There are all sorts of effects on industry, and on people's everything from the industry to people's creative process with these tools. But I think when it really comes down to it, we have to understand and accept that they will always be developing. Nothing's going to stop them. There isn't going to be a pause. Doesn't matter how many signatures are on that list that's been added to for how many years now. The race is similar, akin to, but not the same as a nuclear arms race with, other countries like China with DeepSeek, and especially domestically between Meta, between Alphabet, OpenAI, Anthropic. I mean, this is just it's the train's out of the station. It seems to be this inexorable, race towards what some are calling AGI. But whatever finish line they're looking at, it's not going to stop. So I think it's folly to kind of put your head in the sand and think, well, let's just completely ignore this altogether. I think it's wiser to sort of, as you do, kind of keep abreast of it, and just sort of keep tabs on what's happening. You read a lot about this, I know. So what are your sort of sources? How do you find these tools? How do you read about them? What do you read?
Well, I'm aiming to read this collection of books. I mean, this set of 10 books is one that we're going to read together as a community. I really believe in collective reading.
Love that.
As a teacher and as a learner, I like learning in community with other people and teaching in community with other people. And so we're going to read these 10 books together as a community. And hopefully, having read 10 books about AI from lots of different perspectives, we'll have a little bit of some different perspectives that are not necessarily the day-to-day perspectives. And I think, a lot of but back to the pronouncements about, we're going to have AGI in this amount of time or whatever. I mean, if you look back historically, I think about AI as like one of a series of technological developments that have been important to journalism, have been important to computing, have been important to artistic fields and other kinds of, white collar fields, whatever you want to call them. And there's patterns, right? These developments rhyme with one another. There's differences each time, and there's always a debate about, well, is this similar to other things or is it completely different? And people will rage on about both of those perspectives. But I think what we definitely see in each of these cases is people making grand pronouncements about how quickly the world will never be the same, right? On the one hand, or people saying, this is going to go away. It doesn't really mean anything, right? No one's going to have a computer. Was the famous comment. No one's going to have a computer in their house. Why would you need a computer in your house? You have a computer at your workplace or in a database center, right? No,
right.
People aren't going to use the internet at their home. People aren't going to use the internet on their phone. Like there's all these pronouncements that people aren't going to do something, or that everyone's going to do something tomorrow or in a few years. And I think my feeling is a lot of it tends to be overstated. A lot of it's in the grayer area, more complicated, more nuanced area.
Yes.
I wanted to go back to your one of your other questions about the sort of daily stack or the daily tools.
Yeah, right.
And also to make a point about, for me, it's not always the most complicated or new tools, right? Like there's definitely a kind of frenzy around what's new, right? Like what's brand new. I mean, that's always the case, right? That's like a classic societal tendency, is like we're very fascinated by the newest actor and actress and newest
newsworthy, right?
Yeah, newest car, whatever. Like new, it's just the way we're wired, I guess.
Right.
But in the case of tools, I find a lot of the things that have been around for quite a while are actually still quite useful, and sometimes they're upgrading. For me, one of the things I like to do almost every year is like Google Docs. I write something about like what's new with Google Docs, or what are new ways to use Google Docs, because it's it's like basic infrastructure and plumbing for many of us, or for the internet. Um, and and so it's super, super useful, even though it's been around for, quite a while, a couple decades now.
Yeah.
And so some of the tools that I really rely on are not necessarily the most sexy ones or the most powerful ones. Yes, there are 20 different word processing tools that do all sorts of different things. And by
Mm.
the way, there are some new ones that I think are really interesting, and I'm experimenting with those, and I'll write about them when I feel like they're useful enough that other people might find value in them. Um, because writing is something a lot of us do in one way or another. So I do think writing tools are really important.
Mm.
But sometimes the simpler ones for me are preferable. So I like IA Writer. I still use Google
I
Docs
like that. Yeah. It's a
uh,
yeah.
quite a lot. In terms of other core tools, I do rely heavily on Claude projects.
Mm.
So I find that having context, like a lot of context around the work that I'm doing in terms of background material that I've produced in the past, my own notes,
Yeah.
my own research, my own thinking, my own writing, and having a style that I've kind of pre-coded, having um, uh, an understanding of the kind of tone and the expectations I've given Claude through the instructions.
Mm.
That to me is a helpful thinking partner and a kind of assistant.
Mm.
I see it as a way to check my biases, check my assumptions,
Yeah.
expand my perspectives, all of those things, and also to help me with some technical tasks.
Yeah.
Getting SEO text, getting alt text, getting alternative headline ideas or subject lines, as we think of them in the
Yeah.
Substack world.
Right.
All of those things are quite useful. And then getting copy editing input. Where can I make
Yep.
this weak set of verbs a little bit more tight? How can I avoid these cliches or this redundancy? Those kinds of copy editing things are really helpful. Almost every time it catches something, I've had a double comma, or I have a period where I meant to have a comma, or I left out a quotation mark, or something
Mm.
somewhere. It just glitched because it's late at night, and I'm like, my eyes are glazing over and I missed something.
Yep.
At working at Time Magazine, we had an amazing team of copy editors, right? And so they would mark up my copy and make sure it was clean and nothing was sloppy. And
Yeah.
I don't have that now. Like, it's me, and then it's going to be the reader, and I'm going to have typos or errors, unless I have some Claude assistance in this case. And so that to me has been a really, really big help. Not to mention, tough input, like a tough critic. Like, you don't need that third paragraph about this feature. You've already explained it. Like, get rid of that. Just be more concise.
Hmm.
That to me is also super helpful.
Yes. Yeah. When you came up in journalism, you had great editors, right? You had, human, like
Absolutely.
very direct editors. And
Yeah.
I use this analogy sometimes when I do sometimes do guest lectures at FIT, and I did one at Stanford last year about tools and about learning. And you had a great episode about learning, by the way, that I recommend everyone go and subscribe to Jeremy's Substack and watch the live that he did about learning and teaching. But the thing that I say when students ask me, hey, should I learn to draw on an iPad or on a tablet? I say no. I say learn to draw by hand first, and then port those tools over to your digital toolkit, such that you don't rely on the digital tools too much, like the undo button. If you draw a line by hand, you can't hit undo.
Right.
You're going to draw that line 45 times until you get it exactly right. You don't want that to be a part of your skill set. You really want to understand the fundamentals, the elements, and the principles of design, of art, and then use those tools use those skills on those tools. To that end, I find, I don't know about you, but I find writing extraordinarily difficult. It's like passing a stone for me. Every time I sit down to write, it's just, I have my Strunk and White. I've read every book I can on writing, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And I read a lot of David Sedaris to try and get, information sort of on how to structure essays. John McPhee, I read a bunch of about, structure and language. And I sort of developed those, I want to say hard skills, but like skills without any augmentation, skills without any help. Because I noticed that when I learn them and those, neural pathways start to really strengthen, I have that skill that I can then build on. And then what I did, and I wrote about this in my Substack last week, is I tried to replicate my first newspaper editor. I came up in newspapers, and when I was like 18, 19, I was working at this newspaper where I had a real cantankerous Jonah Jameson type newspaper editor. He was this big, he was a big fat guy. He's not fat anymore. He lost his weight, but he was this big fat guy behind a desk, and he would have absolutely no compunction about telling me if my work was shit and I needed to go back and do it again. You know, he had very strong opinions. And at the time, I was such a precious little darling. I was just like, oh, no, you know, like I was so, you know, hurt by the feedback. And as I kept working with him over the years, I realized just how valuable it is to
Yeah.
have someone like that, because you learn so quickly. And I guess it is because if he was being nice and constructive and very like, you know, oh, this is great, and very like, you know, sycophantic, I don't think I would have learned much at all. And so I built a J. Jonah Jameson editor in Gemini.
Right.
I built this really hard-assed journalist, this ink in his veins, chain-smoking editor in an office. And when I've finished doing my writing by hand, I throw it at him and I say, what do you think? You know, look, as you say, grammar, sentence structure, does this paragraph even need to be in here? What are you trying to say? Are you trying to be funny here? This isn't very funny. And I don't take all of the suggestions. Like some of them I'm like, nah, I want to keep that. That's something I do. And I know there's a right and a wrong way to do things according to E.B. White, but I'm gonna go ahead and just leave that in. But I do find it helpful to have that because I don't have an editor anymore. I wish I did. And yes, I could probably pay to have someone read my work, but it's time consuming and fairly laborious. And let's be honest, it's not cheap. So yeah, I think that's a great use case. Your use case of, you know, of having this thing trained on your voice, your tone, your structure, but also, you know, picking you up on just the little things like grammar and spelling. It helps with, I guess, the legitimacy of your, like if someone reads your work and there's typos and grammar errors and stuff, it just kind of, people aren't necessarily as inclined to trust or believe you or you know, your authority on a thing if it looks like it's kind of scrappy writing. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, I do. I think the other danger is if you read something and you feel like it's an AI generated thing, like if it feels generic and feels either there's too much jargon or just feels generic, that also is sometimes a turnoff, or just might indicate there's less thought. It still might be useful on occasion, especially like information value. If someone's explaining the 3 steps you need to take to complete this, you know, insurance policy thing or whatever. But if it's actually if the intention is to be creative or to kind of give you a human insight, that's a little bit of a turnoff to me in some cases. Although I've talked to a couple people who have a different view on that, where they say, you know, they're not writers and they find this a way to, you know, enable them to write in a way that they couldn't. Which I'm not judging people for their decisions. It's just as a reader, you might react differently.
Yes.
In terms of the process, the editing, you know, I also have the view that it's not just that it's cheaper or that, you know, I don't have a human accessible to me. I have a little bit of a provocative view on that, which is that I think in some cases this is going to be better than many humans would be. So there are great editors, and I don't take anything away from them. And if I could have one of the best editors, that would be great. That would be optimal. But like the average person is going to read something and either not be willing or not be able to say some of the tough things about a piece of writing, or they may not just have the bandwidth to spend the time to really get into the weeds on paragraph 4 and the 4 different verbs that you've used in that paragraph. Like that's just not realistic. And AI can do that in a way that you're just not going to have an editor. Generally speaking, most of us are going to have an editor who's going to do that on a day-to-day basis. Maybe if you're writing a book and that, you know, it's certain special cases.
Yeah, I think books are different, but yeah, I think posts, essays, Substack. I'm going to flip the camera, by the way, because we're more than halfway through, and I like to sketch while I'm talking. But don't think I'm not paying attention. I'm actually paying more attention. I'm more focused when I'm drawing. I find that interesting that you talk about books, because I'm currently on my second of 3 books. And I find that having an editor is incredibly helpful, especially on long projects like this, projects where you know, there is an overarching sort of tone, or there is an overarching sort of theme. It keeps things consistent, but also he teaches me as I go. I'm not an editor. I'm not a book publisher. I'm not in the book industry my whole life like he has been, and this is his area of expertise, and I respect his 10,000 hours, and I take his notes, and I appreciate that he has, a skill set that I do not have. And I think with books, it is different. And yes, you can use AI to write a book or to edit a book. But I do find that having a human in the loop, that you develop I don't know, I guess a relationship with over time. And yes, I know you can do that with with an AI too, but there's something about the conversation and the learning that goes on, and the relationship that you build with an editor that is, I think it's unique, especially with books. You've written a lot over the years. Do you tend to feel the same way about that?
I do. I think I would frame this as like a macro editing and micro editing.
Yeah,
Micro editing
right.
to me is the copy editing. It's the, what about a more punchy way to end on the last sentence? Maybe you can remove that cliche in the third paragraph. Like that's like micro editing.
Right, right. Yeah.
Macro editing is kind of, I think, what you're talking about with this book editor, who says like looking at the big picture of this book.
Mm.
Hey, there's this other topic that you've written about in the past, or they know you as a
Yeah.
person, or they know this market is really, these days, um, let's say they're an agent, like they
Yeah.
know what the book buyers are talking about at the moment, right? In a way that an AI
Yes.
tool might not have that same kind of level of insight. I
Yeah.
again would have the provocative view that even on the macro level, the AI tools can be quite helpful in identifying like big macro structural weaknesses, let's say, or blind spots, or kind of giving you 10 different possible um, types of anecdotes you could use in this concluding message. Like, I still think, even on the macro level, that AI can be useful, but I also totally take your point and agree with you that the human editor has capabilities that are irreplaceable in many cases on that macro view.
Yeah, and to your point with the book club, I love the idea. Just getting back to the sort of human element of things. Um, I do like the idea of community and human relationships as well. The idea that you learning together is a really interesting um, and I think important thing. There's these like Gotham Writers group, where people get together and they share their essays that they're writing with each
Yeah.
other and give constructive feedback. I think that's a really great way to learn.
Have you been part of
Um,
drawing groups like that? Are there drawing groups that do that similarly?
Yeah, I have, and in fact, I kind of, after doing that, with a couple of different places like the Society of Illustrators and things like that, I actually just informally created this little brains trust of artists that I send stuff to for feedback,
Mm.
and they send stuff to me for feedback. And I consider them, as much as their contemporaries or their colleagues, I consider them to be. Mentors in that way. I have people for whom I know this certain elements of this come easier to them than I do, and they have a larger area of expertise and experience. So I tap them for that. I have these groups of artists who specialize, and then I reach out to them if I'm going to be doing an editorial illustration, a gag cartoon for the New Yorker, writing a stand-up bit. If I'm doing a long form piece like a graphic novel style thing, it really depends on what it is. But I can't express enough the value of having people like that in your life, in your sort of sphere, because I think I've learned more from other people giving me feedback on the work I'm doing than any book I've ever read, any class I've ever taken. I didn't go to college. I didn't go to art school. And I think it's a really valuable thing to have.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with you. I think having a partnership of people, some people call them mastermind groups, where you get
Yeah,
together regularly. I started doing that for a while ago, and I'd love to have you part of it if you're interested. With
sure.
for
That'd be
Substack writers, where we
great.
get together periodically and just talk about the Substack craft in a way, even though our subjects are different.
Mm,
And part of it is just kind of hearing from other people about their victories and their challenges and their learnings, and kind of being in community, because in
mm,
many workplaces you're in community with your fellow doctors or fellow business people or lawyers or wherever you are.
right.
If you're a creator, you're not necessarily surrounded by those people.
Yeah,
So having
right.
a community periodically is helpful. Ideally in person, although the realities of our modern lives, it's harder to do that.
Right.
I wanted to also
Yeah,
bring up one other point related to something you mentioned earlier about writing.
sure.
I also think of writing as a broader. I guess I think of writing as part of like structuring people's experiences of consumption, if I can put it that way.
Sure.
It sounds sort of jargon, but what I'm getting at is like I saw your video. You have a video on your site, on your Substack, kind of introducing who you are. I guess it's
Mm,
your like about me video. I think it's about
sure.
3 minutes, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
relatively short. And to
Mhm.
me, like that's a piece of writing. I mean, it's a video, but it's a piece of writing in the sense that it's like a structuring of someone's experience of getting to know who you are in 3 minutes and like how
Yeah.
to make that experience useful, interesting, engaging, informative, all those things. And I think that's a type of writing in the context of something like Substack, where part of the experience is the individual post, but part of the experience is like the whole Substack or the about
Yeah.
page plus all these other elements.
Right.
I think that's something you do actually really, really well.
Well,
And
thank you.
I think there are elements to the writing process, if we want to call it that, that have
Right.
elements of art, that have elements of design and sort of presentation and experiential um, architecting people's experience, if you want to say
Yeah.
it that way. And some
Right.
of that stuff is also tricky to have the AI kind of handle because it's a lot about the human experience of that. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, so I guess I think of writing as more broad than just the individual like posts and the writing of the posts themselves.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you feel the same way, but I've always thought in the same way that, and I didn't coin this term. I've heard many different people use it, including Pat Burns from the New Yorker, saying drawing is thinking.
Hmm.
And I think in another sense, writing is thinking. Writing is a way of organizing thought.
Yeah.
I work through all kinds of things with writing. I journal. I if I'm having a difficult time, I will write. I will, brain dump. I'll do like morning pages, or if I'm having difficulty, kind of consolidating any kinds of thoughts or feelings or just ideas on a topic, I will write them out just to kind of have them on paper. And also, I tend to do it by hand. I'll often type, but I'll tend to do things by hand because of the relationship between the brain and the hand, and what happens when you write by hand and how it slows you down. But yeah, I think writing is thinking, and as you say, it's a part of this experience. Do you do that too? Do you use writing in that sense as well?
I do. By the way, there's a great book about that exact subject, which is called More Than
Oh,
Words by John Warner.
oh, great. Okay.
One of the books in this book, AI book group that we're reading this year for the Wonder Tools book group. And he talks a lot about that. He's a writer and he's talking about why it's important that we still do our own writing in the age of
Mm,
AI. And he
yeah.
talks about how we often clarify our own thinking by starting to put words down and realizing, okay, oh, actually, this is what I think. I didn't quite have that idea clear in my mind until I wrote it down or I tried to write it down and then realized I had to think through it further and then refined it. For me, I find that actually talking out loud helps me clarify my own ideas. It forces me to boil down something that's sort of vague or abstract into something concrete, which is
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I like the
Mm.
technique of interview me, the AI technique where you essentially ask the AI to interview you. Or,
Yeah. Right.
or
That's an
you, or
interesting
you get
one. Yeah.
human to interview you, right? That can be helpful too, but most of us don't have the option of that all the time. But you can ask the AI to kind of interview you whenever you've done something. You've been to a conference, or you've
Mm,
had a day full of meetings, or you whatever it is, and you say like, "Hey, interview me," and you give it some questions, or you have a skill setup or an artifact setup or a Gemini gem or whatever tool you're using, custom GPT,
right.
that does that for you. And then it basically allows you to have the ideas and you to clarify your own ideas because we're used to, in conversation with humans, right? We're used
Mm,
to being forced to put our thoughts together even if we haven't thought about something before.
yeah. Right.
And we don't have the luxury in those circumstances of saying, well, let me think about that for 3 hours because I have writer's block. We just talk, right? We just answer a question. And so for me, that's more useful than kind of just writing in the sense of like looking at the blank screen and starting to type.
Yeah. Right.
So that's become my new default process.
Really?
I'm
So
organized.
you will do the interview. That's how you.
Either interview or I'll just brain dump. So one or the other. So
Ah,
I'll just turn on. I use Letterly as the app. You can use any
Yeah.
other app. You can use Apple Notes for free. You can use any other app that you like.
Yep.
And I just turn it on, it starts recording, and I'm like, oh, I got to start talking. And it's a little bit like a free write, or I don't know if
Yep.
drawing, there's a similar concept. Free write is where you just literally have to keep your pen on the paper and keep it moving
Yeah.
for an amount of time, 3 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yep.
And you can write anything and nothing, and it's okay. But eventually, typically, you get at least a few ideas out onto paper in a matter of a couple minutes.
Yeah. Right.
And for me, it tends to work pretty well. And one reason I like to use AI for this, by the way, instead of just a raw transcription, is because when you use an AI tool, it's going to then summarize. It's going to then give you an outline. It's going to then kind of get rid of the ums and ahs and digressions and the part where you're warming up. And that can be more efficient than when you're taking that material. You don't have to then hunt and peck through a raw transcript of a lot of verbal vomit. You can instead say, oh yeah, these were the 5 key points. Okay, now let me frame the second point as an actual paragraph. Like, what are the 3 subpoints? And in some cases, then I'll do another verbal exploration around that. So I'll say, okay, this is the second part. And yeah, these are the 3 things I think I want to mention here. And I'll just talk that out. And pretty soon I've got like all the building blocks for the whole piece of writing.
Yeah.
And now it becomes more of an editing job, and that I kind of like, and it feels less pressure.
Yeah, it's frictionless. There's less friction to get started as well. I guess if you're a bit of a perfectionist or you have issues with procrastination, it helps stop with that idea of just the first step, just starting,
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I never thought to really do it. I definitely do. Sometimes when I don't feel like typing, I'll use something called Typeless. Are you familiar with this tool?
It's one of these AI kind of like a voice dictation tool.
It's a dictation tool that kind of learns your vernacular, but also it's actually surprisingly accurate for all the, Whisperboard and all of these like Whisper AI and all of these different dictation tools that use AI to transcribe your things, the things you say. It does understand context. It will allow corrections midstream, and I definitely think that, as you say, if you just don't feel like sitting down and writing out all your notes from a conference or something, yeah, you can, in that different format, just get started from like just a basic idea from that kind of place. And if I'm writing an essay, sometimes I will brain dump everything that happened via audio, and I will then have it transcribed just to kind of give myself a sense of like, all right, pull out which elements of this you actually want to kind of write about. What's interesting here? What's funny? What's useful? What might be entertaining? And what's interesting as well, just relevant to this, that we're doing right now as Substack Live, is you do get a transcript of the Substack Live once it's processed, and it's not always great. I have to be honest. The transcription on Substack Live, it's not always that good. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect. But I listen back to learn. I listen back to these as an MP3, and I listen to write the recap the next day. And if I need direct quotes, I will go to the transcript and drop that into something and say, hey, can you find the bit where I talked about, Whisperboard or whatever it is? And can you, let me know what was the quote that Jeremy said about this, or what was the quote that I said about this, so that I can then quote that accurately instead of trying to recall it manually.
Yeah.
By the way, I've just drawn. This is how I picture him. This is my mean newspaper editor.
That's great.
If he was here, this is I call him Brian. So
I think so. I really enjoyed that. I have to say, I enjoyed watching that. It's like watching a magician for me, because I could not draw, as I'm sure many other people can relate to that. Like I it's always something I've wanted to be able to do, and I just can't. And so watching you do it is just like watching a magician do some tricks, and it's a pleasure. As a violinist too, as a violinist.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Or as a journalist, and also it just reminds me of, or just gets me thinking about the value of live performance and kind of different contexts. With music, we're very accustomed to that, but with art, at least I'm not as accustomed to experiencing that live. I've seen Liza do her.
She does those. Yeah,
she does those, and I've shared those with my daughter. One of my daughters who really loves digital art as well, and seeing her process was really instructive to me. And just as it is now, seeing you, and I think it's really interesting because I always think about live performance in the context of music or dance or theater, and and so it's exciting in a way that this format allows for this new kind of visual performance of art in a way.
Mm.
How is it different for you doing that on a lot in a live setting with other people watching versus doing it for yourself alone?
Well, yeah, for 21 years, I've been doing live drawing at events. So, like caricatures or portraits or reportage or whatever it is, I've been doing that. And it's a skill that I've sort of had to develop over the years of drawing with eyes on me. It is difficult. I found it very difficult, especially the first 5 to 10 years. I was just like really nervous about making a mistake. But then you have to just be confident in your line. You have to almost, you just have a sense of like, all right, I'm doing this live. It's live and dangerous. Own the mistakes, like lean into them if there is a mistake. Some people won't even know that you've made a mistake. You're the only one who recognizes if you screw up. But yeah, I think it's. I actually wanted to finish on this because I was really fascinated to learn that you were a violinist. I was reading this book, From Strength to Strength, by Arthur
Yeah,
C. Brooks. He was a musician, also French horn, I
for
think.
sure. Yeah,
And it's the 10,000 hours thing really fascinates me, and also just the elements of like live performance and building these sort of skills in your what's it called, fluid intelligence in your
yeah,
first
yeah, yeah.
half. And now you're in this crystallized intelligence. You're teaching, you're sharing, you're still learning, but you're able to impart lessons and share what you've learned and share these skills that you developed. I think, I mean, I'm in that transitional phase, I think, between Act One and Act Two, where, this crystallized intelligence up until now, and I think, sorry, a fluid. And then I think now I'm starting to realize, okay, I've really done more than my 10,000 hours, which is what you just saw. But watching someone play an oboe or a French horn or a violin or a guitar, like, it's mesmerizing to me. It's one of my favorite things in the world to watch artists, practice their craft that they've studied and made so many mistakes over and over again to learn and get good at. I think that kind of, I'll never get sick of that. Doesn't matter how good AI gets.
Right.
Um, I think we'll always just have that. We'll always be drawn to. I'd like to think we'll always be drawn to that, not just the novelty of AI being able to replicate it, just a human doing a thing like that. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, first of all, it's beyond words, right? AI is great at words. It's language engine, right? Is what these AI models really are, and music is really beyond words. And it's something. It's funny. Somebody was responding to Timothy Chalamet's comment about opera or whatever,
Opera, yeah.
and they were a classical musician essentially saying like, "Hey, they're coming for your jobs, but we're people are just you're not going to see a robot playing Yo-Yo Ma anytime soon or in place of Yo-Yo Ma." And I do think there is something special and human about um, performances of classical music. I think there'll be interesting experiments with composition,
Yeah,
with
sure.
and with digital music. I think that can be interesting for people. But yeah, there's something special about a human performance, and it's also gets us outside of this race against time. This music is timeless. It's been around in many cases. Some of the great masterworks have been around for a couple centuries already, and they'll be around far longer than most of us. And they move more slowly than our current lives move. Like you're sitting in a
Mhm.
concert hall and you're stepping outside of time in a way. You mentioned deep work. Cal Newport.
Yeah.
Like I think like deep music where you're actually like inside the music, inside the experience for a
Mhm.
period of time, whether you're performing or whether you're fortunate enough to be in a performance where you, as an observer or a attendee, as where you can invest yourself fully in it and engage fully in the music. I think that is hugely valuable in contrast to like the frenetic pace we're in New York City or any other city when we're in front of a computer and like typing things out, getting messages, one after the other every day.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, tremendous value, even more value in many ways. The faster everything else goes, like having those slow things has even more value from my
Mm.
perspective, and we need that even more than we needed it in the past.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like many other fields, like the classical music field is also in a really tough, kind of economic and financial position and social and
Yeah.
cultural position in terms of
Yeah.
maintaining relevance, etc. Um, but that's a whole other challenge.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, but live performance, like for classical music, will not be going away in my estimation.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I love that. I think people are gravitating more towards in-person live music and comedy and theater and things. Certainly in New York, I'm noticing. There's this after it was probably the pandemic that did it, but after everyone being isolated behind a little screen, I think people are actually enjoying the experience of getting out and about.
Yeah,
Theaters aren't doing great. Movie theaters aren't doing too great, but but
one
other
of the
live performance, that's not really a live performance, but
one of the things I'm excited about this spring is I'm going to do for the first time be part of a series called Lectures on Tap.
Oh, I'm doing that too.
You doing
I'm
that
doing
too?
that too.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah.
cool.
I will be doing it on oh gosh, in April. I'm actually
Okay.
posting about it tomorrow morning. So
Oh, so
everyone
maybe I'll go. Maybe
subscribe.
I'll go see yours first to see what it's like because I've never been to
Yeah,
one as an attendee. So maybe I'll try to go to yours and hopefully do mine in May. And it's about classical music actually
great. That's awesome.
because
I'll definitely go to that. I'll be
I,
really interested to
I,
see
I
it.
and the reason I mention it is because part of what attracts me to it is like we do so many of these online things,
Yeah,
and it really is meaningful to me at least to be in the room with people and to learn from them or share with them or just be in community in the physical world.
yeah,
And especially in kind of like a learning or sharing kind of context. I'm not a
hmm,
bar person normally. Like that event we met at, the Substack thing, was kind of a bar and
yeah,
loud, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not typically my jam. But I like things where it's like actually people talking and listening and thinking, and so that
yeah.
seems like fun. And anyone who hasn't heard of it, it's a pretty fun new kind of thing. I don't know. You could say more about it.
No, yeah. I mean, I probably know about as much about it as you do, but I've booked mine for April, and I just got my promotional images and stuff through last night. I'm going to be posting it on my Substack tomorrow. So anyone interested in coming along in New York City, stay tuned for that. The tickets are on sale as of tonight. And it's, yeah, as you say, it's getting together in person in a context of more like a bar scenario where people are together, they're drinking, they're learning something, they're being entertained by ideas from interesting people, kind of like a TED talk with drinks.
Mhm, mhm.
And
A little bit longer.
I,
A little bit longer.
a little bit longer. Yeah, exactly.
45 minutes, right? And then questions.
45. That's right. And then a Q&A for
Are
like
you, are
10,
you
15
with
minutes.
your comedy hat on, or with your drawing hat on, or with your teacher hat on, or
Both.
what? Okay.
Both. I'm going to be talking about the my experience writing and drawing cartoons for the New Yorker
Wow.
and the creative process behind that, and some funny stories that have happened with that over the years. But then also, yeah, there's some comedy in there as well, just to kind of keep it
Great.
light and fun and interesting. But yeah, they're a great organization. So anyone who wants to follow them on Instagram, look up Lectures on Tap. They do lectures all over. I think in Chicago, LA, Philly, New York, Boston. Yeah, I think all over the place. So really excited about that. I'm glad to hear you're doing it too. That's really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I'm gonna give it a try. We'll see how it goes.
You're
I'm
literally
all,
a lecturer. You'll be great.
but I this is not my normal subject, right? Like I
Sure. Yeah.
this is outside of my sphere of professional expertise. It's just something I'm passionate about. So, but the
Sure.
magic of classical music, essentially, what we were just talking about.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, we've blasted past the 1 hour mark, and I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for thank you for your candor. Thank you for your sharing all of your knowledge and information. Anyone who's joined us before I mentioned it last, please click up here, click subscribe, and subscribe to Wonder Tools, Jeremy Kaplan. And thank you for everything you do. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be
Thank you.
following along
Great
with
to meet
great
you.
interest.
Great to talk with you. Yeah.
Of course. All right. Well, have a great weekend, and guys, we'll see you at the next one. See you later, Jeremy.
Bye bye.